Hello, boys and girls. Happy Thursday. I hope everybody's doing awesome. I'll go ahead and warn you guys if you hear some background noise, it's because it's thundering outside, so don't be alarmed. So let's go ahead and just jump right in with chapter 7 and 8 today. While we are reading, remember, try to think about what point of view the story is being written from. Try to make connections with the characters. Who do the characters remind you of in your life? And I'll just give a little summary of what we read yesterday before we start. So, yesterday in chapters 5 and 6, we talked about, we read about how Winn-Dixie acted when he was in church. He caught the mouse and they got rid of the mouse at church. And then in chapter 6, Opal went to the library and she was talking to Miss Franny, and Miss Franny got scared because she thought that Winn-Dixie was the bear that visited her. And now, in chapter 7, we are about to hear the story of when Miss Franny ran into a bear at the library. So, let's go ahead and jump right in. Chapter 7. Back when Florida was wild, when it consisted of nothing but palmetto trees and mosquitoes so big that they could fly away with you. Miss Franny Block started in. And I was just a little girl, no bigger than you. My father, Herman W. Block, told me that I could have anything I wanted for my birthday. Anything at all. Miss Franny looked around the library. She leaned in close. I don't want to appear prideful, she said, but my daddy was a very rich man. A very rich man. She nodded and leaned back and said, and I was a little girl who loved to read. So I told him. I said, Daddy, I would most certainly love to have a library for my birthday. A small little library would be wonderful. You asked for a whole library? A small one, Miss Franny nodded. I wanted a little house full of nothing but books, and I wanted to share them too. And I got my wish. My father built me this house, the very one we are sitting in now. And at a very young age, I became a librarian. Yes, ma'am. What about the bear? I said. Did I mention that Florida was wild in those days? Said Miss Franny Block said. Uh-huh, you did. It was wild. There were wild men and wild women and wild animals. Like bears. Yes, ma'am, that's right. Now, I have to tell you, I was a little Miss Know-It-All. I was a Miss Smarty Pants with my library full of books. Oh, yes, ma'am. I thought I knew the answers to everything. Well, one hot Thursday I was sitting in my library with all the doors and windows open, and my nose stuck in a book, when a shadow crossed the desk. And without looking up, yes, ma'am, and even looking up, without even looking up, I said, Is there a book I can help you find? Well, there was no answer, and I thought it might have been a wild man or a wild woman, scared of all these books and afraid to speak up. But then I became aware of a very peculiar smell, a very strong smell. Let's look at this word peculiar. Well, let's finish this sentence first. A very strong smell. I raised my eyes slowly, and standing right in front of me was a bear. Yes, ma'am, a very large bear. First, how would you feel if you were sitting there and you looked up out of your book and there was a bear sitting there? I would be terrified. I wouldn't know what to do. I would probably scream a little bit, but yeah, I would probably freak out. Let's look at this word peculiar. She says, but then I became aware of a very peculiar smell, a very strong smell. This word peculiar, it means strange or odd, something out of the ordinary or unusual. It's a smell that, she probably had never smelled in the library before. Excuse me. Anyway, let's continue reading. A very strong smell. I raised my eyes slowly, and standing right in front of me was a bear. Yes, ma'am, a very large bear. How big? I asked. Oh, well, said Miss Franny, perhaps 3 times the size of your dog. Then what happened? I asked. Well, said Miss Franny, I looked at him, and he looked at me. He put his big nose up in the air and sniffed, as if he was trying to decide if a little Miss Know-it-all librarian was what he was in the mood to eat. And I sat there. And then I thought, well, if this bear intends to eat me, I'm not going to let it happen without a fight. No, ma'am. So very slowly and very carefully, I raised the book I was reading. What book was that? I asked. Why, it was War and Peace, a very large book. I raised it up slowly, and then I aimed it carefully and threw it right at that bear and screamed, Be gone! And do you know what? No, ma'am, I said. He went. But this is what I will never forget. He took the book with him. Nuh-uh, I said. He went. Yes, ma'am, said Miss Franny. He snatched it up and ran. Did he come back? I asked. No, I never saw him again. Well, the men in town used to tease me about it. They would say, Miss Franny, we saw that bear of yours out in the woods today. He was reading that book, and he said it sure was good, and would it be all right if he kept it for just another week? Yes, ma'am. They did tease me about it, she sighed. I imagine if I'm the only one left from those days. I imagine if I'm the only one who even recalls that bear. All my friends, everyone I knew when I was young, they're all dead and gone. She sighed again. She looked sad and old and wrinkled. It was the same way I felt sometimes, being friendless in a new town and not having a mama to comfort me. I sighed too. Winn-Dixie raised his head off his paws and looked back and forth between me and Miss Franny. He sat up, then showed Miss Franny his teeth. Well now, look at that, she said. That dog is smiling at me. It's a talent of his, I told her. It's a fine talent, Miss Franny said. A very fine talent. And she smiled back at Winn-Dixie. We could be friends, I said to Miss Franny. I mean, you, me, and Winn-Dixie. We could all be friends. Miss Franny smiled even bigger. Why, that would be grand, she said. Just grand. And right at that minute, right when the three of us had decided to be friends, who should come marching into the Herman W. Block Memorial Library but old pinch-faced Amanda Wilkinson. She walked right up to Miss Franny's desk and said, I finished Johnny Tremaine, and I enjoyed it very much. I would like something even more difficult to read now, because I'm an advanced reader. Yes, dear, I know, said Miss Franny. She got up out the chair. Amanda pretended like I wasn't there. She stared right past me. Are dogs allowed in the library? She asked Miss Franny as they walked away. Certain ones, said Miss Franny. A select few. And then she turned around and winked at me. I smiled back. I had just made my first friend in Naomi, and nobody was going to mess that up for me. Not even old pinch-faced Amanda Wilkinson. All right, let's talk about it. So, in this chapter, we read about Miss Franny's encounter with a bear in the library, and people made fun of her. People made fun of her and saying that, oh, we saw that bear that was reading that book, and he just wants to know if he can keep it for one more week. They treated her like they didn't believe her. And then one of Opal's classmates came in, and she just finished a book, and she tried to pretend that Opal wasn't even there. All right. Chapter 8. When Dixie's bald spot started growing fur, and the fur he had begun with started to look shiny and healthy, and he didn't limp anymore, and you could tell that he was proud of looking so good, proud of not looking like a stray. I thought what he needed most was a collar and a leash, so I went into Gertrude's Pets. where there were fish and snakes and mice and lizards and gerbils and pet supplies, and I found a real handsome red leather collar with a matching leash. Winn-Dixie was not allowed to come in the store. There was a big sign on the door that said "No dogs allowed." So I held the collar and the leash up to the window, and Winn-Dixie, who was standing on the other side of the window, pulled up his lip and showed me his teeth, and sneezed and wagged his tail, something furious. So I knew he absolutely loved the leash and collar combination, but it was very expensive. So I decided to explain my situation to the man behind the counter. I said, "I don't get a big enough allowance to afford something so fancy, but I love this collar and leash, and so did my dog. I was thinking that maybe you could set me up on an installment plan." "Installment plan?" said the man. "Gertrude!" somebody screamed in a real irritating voice. I looked around. It was a parrot. She was sitting on top of one of those fish tanks looking right at me. "An installment plan," I said, ignoring the parrot. "You know, where I promise to give you my allowance every week and you give me the leash and the collar now." "I don't think I can do that," said the man. He shook his head. "No, the owner, she wouldn't like that." He looked down at the counter. He wouldn't look at me. He had thick black hair, and it was slicked back like Elvis Presley. He had on a name tag, too, that said Otis. "Or I could work for you," I said. "I could come in and sweep the floors and dust the shelves and take out the trash. I could do that." I looked around Gertrude's Pets. There was sand and sunflower seed shells and a big dust ball. Excuse me, I'm going to read that again. I looked around Gertrude's Pets. There was sand and sunflower seed shells and big dust balls all over the floor. I could tell that it needed to be swept. Said Otis. He looked down at the counter some more. "Gertrude!" the parrot screamed again. "I'm real trustworthy," I said. "I'm new in town, but my daddy is a preacher. He's the preacher at the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi, so I'm real honest. But the only thing is, Winn-Dixie, my dog, he would have to come inside with me. But if we get separated for too long, he starts to howl. Something terrible." "Gertrude doesn't like dogs," said Otis. "Is she the owner?" I asked. "Yes. No. Finally, he looked up. He pointed at the fish tank. "That Gertrude, the parrot. I named her after the owner." "Gertrude's a pretty bird," screamed Gertrude. "She might like Winn-Dixie," I told Otis. "Almost everybody does. Maybe he could come inside and meet her. And if the two of them get along, maybe could I have the job?" "Maybe," Otis mumbled. He looked down at the counter again. So I went and opened the door, and Winn-Dixie came trotting inside the store. "Dog!" screamed Gertrude. "I know it," Otis told her. And then Gertrude got real quiet. She sat on top of the fish tank and cocked her head from one side to the other, looking at Winn-Dixie. And Winn-Dixie stood and stared back at her. He didn't hardly move. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't smile. He didn't sneeze. He just looked at Gertrude, and she stared at him. And then she spread her wings out real far and flew and landed on top of Winn-Dixie. "Dog!" she croaked. Winn-Dixie wagged his tail just a little tiny bit, and Otis said, "You could start on Monday." "Thank you," I told him. "You won't be sorry." On the way out of Gertrude's Pets, I said to Winn-Dixie, "You are better at making friends than anyone I've ever known. I bet if my mama knew you, she would think you were the best dog ever." Winn-Dixie was smiling up at me, and I was smiling down at him, and so neither one of us were looking where we were going, and we almost bumped right into Sweetie Pie Thomas. She was standing there sucking on the knuckle of her third finger, staring in the window of Gertrude's Pets. She took the finger out of her mouth and looked at me. Her eyes were all big and round. "Was that bird sitting on that dog's head?" she asked. She had her hair tied up in a ponytail with a pink ribbon, but it wasn't much of a ponytail. It was mostly ribbon and a few strands of hair. "Yes," I told her. "I seen it," she said. She nodded her head and put her knuckle back in her mouth. Then she took it out again. I seen that dog at church, too. He was catching a mouse. I want a dog just like it, but my mama won't let me get a dog. She says if I'm real good, she might. She says if I'm real good, I might get to buy me a goldfish or one of them gerbils. That's what she says. Can I pet your dog? Sure, I told her. Sweetie Pie stroked Winn-Dixie's head so long and serious that his eyes drooped half closed and drool came out of the side of his mouth. I'm going to be 6 years old in September. I got to stop sucking on my knuckle once I'm 6, said Sweetie Pie. I'm having a party. Do you want to come to my party? The theme is pink. Sure, I told her. Can this dog come? She asked. You bet, I told her. All of a sudden, I felt happy. I had a dog. I had a job. I had Miss Franny Block for a friend. And then I had my first invitation to a party in Naomi. It didn't matter that it came from a 5-year-old, and the party wasn't until September. I didn't feel so lonely anymore. All right. So, we have read chapters 7 and 8. So it sounds like things are getting better for Opal. You know, she just got her friend. Yes, her friend is an old lady that works at a library. But she felt really lonely, and now she doesn't feel so lonely anymore because she does have a new friend. She has a job which she got because her dog was being so awesome to the bird, and the bird liked her. She also just got invited to a party from a 5-year-old that is turning 6. Opal probably feels like she's starting to fit in. So, what you're going to do is you're going to go work on your assignment from these chapters, and then you can hear more tomorrow. So, have a good day, guys. Bye.